The poem is called When We Two Parted and is written by Lord Byron in 1808. Lord Byron was born in 1788 and died in 1824. He's mostly famous for the novel Don Juan, and he's known as a womanizer and is claimed to have been with over 200 different women over the course of 2 years while being in Venice.
The poem consists of 4 stanzas, each divided into 8 verses. The first 4 lines is 5 syllables, but the pattern changes in verse 5 when Byron goes from 5 to 6 syllables, which emphasizes the word cold.
There's a structure of rhymes in the last words of each verse. We see that the structure is A, B, C, D, etc., meaning that the last words of every second stanza rhymes. The poem is about a guy who had his heart broken by a girl. We assume that the guy is Lord Byron and that the lady is Lady Frances, who he was known to have an affair with. The poem expresses how the relationship ended and how Lord Byron was heartbroken by this breakup.
The language in the poem is easily comprehensible, which is also very characteristic for the Romantic age. The poem is set up as a monologue, which established that the narrator is grieving by himself and doesn't want to share his feelings with anyone, which fits very much with the general feeling of the poem, where we have a very gloomy, sad and sorrowful mood. In the poem, we see how his mood evolves from being sad to defensive to angry, which shows that he is deeply affected by this secret relationship or affair with Lady Frances.
The majority of his poems are of the same type as the story about Don Juan, in which he objectifies women. This poem, however, is different because it expresses his sad and broken heart created by a woman, not something we typically experience in his writing. This indicates that he was deeply in love and affectioned by Lady Frances, but she broke his heart. Since this poem is unusual, it indicates that Lady Frances was unusual and that their relationship was special for him. The secrecy of the relationship is shown throughout the poem. For example, when he expresses the shame of the name, or when he writes, "In secret we met," which means that no one can know about this relationship. The next line, "In silence I grieve," also show his deep affection.
In the last 2 verses of stanza 2 of the poem, Lord Byron writes, "I hear thy name spoken and share in its shame," by which he means that he shares the shame of, or Lady Frances' shame of the affair, because at that time, for a married woman as Lady Frances, it was very scandalous and shameful to have affairs with other men.
He links his sorrow with the fact that Lady Frances doesn't feel the same way about him. We see this in verse 6 to 7, stanza 1, where he writes, "Colder thy kiss, truly that hour for whole sorrow to this."
An example of symbolism in the poem is when the two part, his love turns cold and pale, which is often associated with death and has the symbolic meaning that she is dead to him.
As mentioned earlier, in verse 5 of the first stanza, he emphasizes the word cold. The coldness is a symbol of his broken heart and Lady Frances' attitude toward Lord Byron.
The themes of this poem could be broken or forbidden love. The narrator's love for the woman is not returned, which leads to their breakup, making him depressed and sad. It could also be emotional death, shown in the coldness in this poem, or regret or remorse, even depression, as Lord Byron was known to have a depression in his life. Lord Byron uses a lot of repetition, but a really important one is the second verse in the first stanza and the last verse in the last stanza, where he writes "silence and tears."
He uses alliteration throughout the poem. We see this in the third stanza in verse 5, where he says, "They know not I knew thee."
Byron uses assonance. For example, in third stanza, verse 1, where he says, "They name thee before me."
These rhetorical devices makes it easier for the common reader to understand the poem, and, along with the rhythm, it makes the poem easy to read and comprehend. This poem is a very typical romantic poem. We see this since the poem expresses feelings of love, which is very typical for the Romantic age. Another thing that's typical for the Romantic age is the fact that the language is very easy to understand, which is also the case in this poem. The easy language reaches a broader audience since everyone can read it.